Hey guys, welcome to Unit 1, Lesson 1, Day 2. So we're going to continue today talking about functions, but we're going to be looking at functions that contain exponents and radicals, or what we call square roots and stuff. So just a real quick review of our goals for today. We want to review what exponents and square roots are, so we'll talk about that a little bit first. And then we want to be able to evaluate a function that contains square roots and exponents. All right, so we're going to take a look at, like once we know what exponents and square roots are, once we review that, let's look at some function stuff that uses those things. All right, and then this last one here is just we want to understand why there's no solution when evaluating the square root of a negative number. Okay, so notice I use the word real solution. We'll talk about what that means, and we'll talk about why you can't get an answer when you try and square root a negative number. All right, so let's start off with our review here. We're going to start off with exponents. So last lesson we kind of left off with a couple of more complicated functions that did have some square roots and some exponents in it, so we want to talk about what an exponent is. And if we look at this expression here, you'll notice there's a 3 and there's a 2. So this 3 is what we call the base, right? That's the number below, and then this little number on top of the base is what we call the exponent. Okay, so this is our exponent. And I'll just put exp there. All right, so what does this thing tell us to do? What is this little 2 telling us? And what that little 2 is telling us to do is to take the base and multiply it by itself 2 times. So when we see 3 to the second power, another way to say that is 3 squared. All right, and what that means is we're taking 3 and we're multiplying it by itself twice. So we're going to have 3 times 3. So we're multiplying 3 by itself twice. So 3 times 3 is 9, therefore 3 squared is 9. Okay, so similarly, if we went over here, you'll notice the base is 3, the exponent is 4, so that means I'm going to take 3 and I'm going to multiply it by itself 4 times. So I've got 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. All right, so 3 times itself 4 times. That's what this thing means. So 3 times 3, that's 9. Right, so if I do those two, and then if I do these two, 3 times 3 is 9. So now we have 9 times 9, which is 81. So 3 to the 4th power is 81. We could also do that in our calculator, so I'll pull up my calculator here. If I want to do 3 to the 4th power, I hit 3, and then over here on my calculator there's a little caret key. We call that the caret. If you hit that, it'll bring up the little exponent box here, and you can enter in whatever exponent you like. So I'm going to enter in a 4, and 3 to the 4th power is indeed 81. So you can always use your calculator to help you out with those exponents as well. Now, a lot of times when we're dealing with functions, that exponent is not going to be on a number. Instead, it's going to be on a variable like an x or a y or something like that. Well, nothing really changes. The law of the exponent still applies. It still means to do the same thing, right? So when we see x squared, that means I'm going to take whatever x is, and I'm going to multiply x by itself twice, right? So I have x times x. So x squared simply means x times x. And I really can't do that because I don't know what x is. So I just break it down into its multiplication form, right? So exponents, multiplication form. All right, so same thing here. X to the 4th is simply going to mean x times x times x times x 4 times. All right. So that's what exponents means. Let's talk a little bit about square roots. All right, so square root symbol is this little symbol right here. It almost looks like a check mark, but it encloses a number. So they'll put a number inside of that check mark, and this reads the square root of 9. Well, what does the square root of 9 mean? It's actually the opposite of the square of 3. Okay, so when we think about it, it's the opposite of squaring. So what I'm looking for is a number that when I multiply it by itself, I'll get 9. So I got to think of a number. So for instance, like let's say I just guessed at it and I said 2. So that means I would have to do 2 times 2, and 2 times 2 equals 4, not 9. So the answer is not 2. But when I do 3 times 3, I get 9. So the square root of 9 is 3, because when I take 3 and I multiply it by itself, I get that 9, the number inside of the square root. Let's try it again. All right, so we have a 36. I'm looking for a number that if I were to multiply it by itself, I would get 36. All right, so that number is going to be 6. All right, so if I do 6 times 6, I get 36. So the square root of 36 is 6. All right, and again, you could use your calculator to help you out with that. So if I do the square root, if I hit second, and you'll notice that the square root symbol is in blue. That's why I hit the second button first, and then I hit this button where that square root symbol is. It'll input the square root symbol for me, and I'll put a 36 in there and hit enter. And you'll notice that we got the 6 that we did when we did it manually over here. All right, so all a square root does is it takes this number inside and it says, okay, what number would you multiply by itself to get that number inside of the square root? So if I took 6 and I multiplied it by 6, I would get 36. That's how I know I got the right answer. So let's take a look at this one. Now we did the square root of positive 9 over here and we got a 3 because 3 times 3 is 9. Well, now we're looking for a number that when I multiply it by itself, I'll get a negative 9. Well, we know that it can't be positive 3. Right? Because when I do 3 times 3, I get positive 9, not negative 9. Well, what about negative 3? Okay, so if I take negative 3 times negative 3, right? So I would have to do it like that. Well, negative 3 times negative 3, if you remember from 8th grade math, negative times a negative is still a positive. So this is still a positive 9. Some of you might be thinking, well, we would have to do 3 times negative 3, but that would violate the definition of a square root because these are not the same number. Remember, we had to do 3 times 3 because those are the same number, a number multiplied by itself. 6 multiplied by itself. 3, well, that's not itself. So we can't do this either. All right, so this is not allowed. So this is why we can't take the square root of a negative number, because there is no number, no real number, that you can multiply by itself to get negative 9. So this would be one of those weird situations where we would say DNE for does not exist. All right, so there's your review for exponents and square roots. Hopefully that helps out, because now we're going to take a look at functions that actually have these things in them, right? So you'll notice our function here in the function machine, we have x squared minus 10, so we have an exponent going on. And I'm just going to run through the vocab here real quick and make sure that I identify each of these things, right? So the name of our function is f. Okay, so you can tell that from the letter that they use here. The rule is this thing on the right-hand side of the equal sign, so the rule is going to be x squared minus 10. All right, so just a recap from yesterday, remember what a function does is it's like a machine. You put a number into it, it does stuff to it. The rule is the stuff that is done to that number. All right, so whatever number I put in there, this is what I'm going to do to it. All right, now what number am I going to put in there? That's what's going to be in the parentheses. So for right now, the input is x until they give me an actual number. The output is going to be f of x. All right, so this entire thing is the output. So when I put x in, it's going to do stuff to it, and I'm going to get f of x out. Let's give it a try. All right, so here they're telling me the input is 2. So I'm putting a 2 into my function. All right, so 2 goes in, and it's going to replace the x in my rule. So I have 2 squared minus 10. And then I evaluate using my order of operations. Okay, so 2 squared means 2 times 2 minus 10. Well, 2 times 2 is 4, and I still have a minus 10. And 4 minus 10 equals negative 6. So I put a 2 in, I did stuff to it, and I got out a negative 6. All right. And we're going to do this again, this time with a negative 2, right? So this time when I go to my machine, I'm putting a negative 2 into the machine. It goes in, it replaces the x, so I'll have negative 2, and I'm going to put a parenthesis around this, squared minus 10. And I'll explain why I put that parenthesis around it here in just a second, okay? Let's do it by hand first. The parentheses are really there to help me out with the calculator, but let's do it by hand instead, all right? So negative 2 squared means I have to take this number, negative 2, and multiply it by itself twice. So I've got negative 2 times negative 2 minus 10, all right? So negative 2 times negative 2, remember from 8th grade math, a negative times a negative is a positive. So this is going to be a positive 4 minus 10. which is weird because it's the same thing that we got up here, right? So 4 minus 10 equals a negative 6. So when I put a negative 2 in, I did stuff to it, and I got out a negative 6. All right. Now real quick, I'm just going to show you why we like the parentheses, and I showed this in the video yesterday as well, but when you deal with negatives on the calculator is not quite as smart as you are. So you'll notice if I just put a negative 2 and square it, we get a negative 4, but remember when we did it by hand we got a positive 4. So watch what happens when I put a parenthesis around it. Okay, and this is why you need those parentheses, right? You get the actual correct answer, which is a positive 4. All right, and what the calculator is doing there is it's squaring the 2 and then applying the negative after the fact, but when you put the parentheses around it, it'll include that negative when you do the squaring operation. All right, so that's why you want to make sure you put those parentheses around that number if you're going to use the calculator. All right. Next set here, all right, we got another function. This one's got a square root in it, no problem. Let's go through our vocabulary here real quick. So we got the name of the function, again, is going to be f, so I'm going to call it f. The rule is right here, everything on the right hand side of the equal sign, so we got the square root of x minus 7. Our input, right, there is right here in the parentheses, so for right now it's going to be x, and the output is this entire thing on the left hand side of the equal sign. The output is f of x. I'm going to put x in, I'm going to do stuff to it, I'm going to get out f of x. All right, so let's give it a try. My input is 71, right? So I come over here to my machine, dump a 71 into it, it replaces the x. So essentially what I get is the square root of 71 minus 7. All right, now square roots are a little bit weird because when we're doing order of operations here, you don't really see anything in order of operations that talks about a square root, but the square root is the same thing as an exponent, okay? And when you get to Algebra 2, we'll talk about why that is, but for right now you just need to know it's the same thing as an exponent, so it's going to come before we do this operation inside, technically. But we are going to do the operation inside first, and then we're going to do the square root. All right, so when I do 71 minus 7, okay, we're going to get 64. And then I'm going to do the square root of 64, so I'm looking for a number multiplied by itself that would get me 64. And that number is 8, right? Because if I do 8 times 8, I get that 64. Okay, so 71 goes into my function, I did stuff to it, and I got out an 8. All right, let's try it again. Okay, so this time I'm going to put a 43 in there, right? So into my machine goes a 43. Okay, so I got 43 minus 7, which is 36. So inside of that square root, I'm going to have a 36 when I do that subtraction first. And then I'm going to square root it. And I'm looking for a number multiplied by itself that will give me a 36. Well, that's going to be 6. So I put a 43 in, did stuff, got a 6. All right, last one here. We're going to put a negative 2 in there. So over here with my machine, I'm kind of thinking about how this function works. I'm putting a negative 2 in, it goes in, it replaces the x. So I'm going to have square root of negative 2 minus 7. And if I do negative 2 minus 7, you can use your calculator if you get a little bit confused here. So I'm going to go negative 2 minus 7, and I got a negative 9. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in my square root. And if you recall from an earlier problem, we figured out we cannot do this, right? The square root of negative 9 does not have an answer, so this is a DNE. So I put a negative 2 in, I did stuff to it, but what they were asking me to do was impossible. So there is no answer. All right, guys, that's it for today's lesson. Hopefully you go back and finish up those practice problems that go along with this lesson. That will definitely help you understand this topic. Make sure you post in the discussion for the day. Have a great day, guys.